Hi, everyone. Imagine waking up one morning and realizing that everything you've ever wanted, every dream, every goal, every version of yourself that you admire from a distance, is not separated from you by talent or intelligence or even opportunity, but by something far more mundane and far more uncomfortable: your ability to do something consistently, especially when you don't feel like it. That's where people get it wrong. They think change begins with motivation, but motivation is unreliable. It flickers like a candle in the wind. What truly builds transformation is discipline, cold, structured, repetitive discipline, the kind that tells you that even if you don't feel inspired, even if the day isn't perfect, even if you're tired, you will still give 1 hour to something that improves your life. That 1 hour, taken seriously, is not just time passing by. It is the construction site of your future identity. An identity is not formed by what you occasionally do. It is shaped by what you repeatedly choose despite resistance. Small, consistent actions do not look powerful on the surface. 1 hour of reading doesn't turn you into a genius. 1 hour of studying a skill doesn't make you a master. 1 hour of exercise doesn't transform your body. In fact, at first, it feels insignificant, almost irrelevant. But that's the deception of short-term perception. We live in a world addicted to immediacy. The modern mind is conditioned to believe that if progress is not instantly visible, it must not exist. And so people quit, not because it's impossible, but because they can't tolerate the quiet phase of unseen growth. They don't realize that transformation always begins in silence, in solitude, in moments where no one applauds you, and no one even notices that you're trying. But those 1 hour increments, compounded over time, begin to accumulate in ways that are almost mathematical in nature. What feels like a drop in the moment becomes an ocean when done daily. People underestimate accumulation. They overestimate what they can do in a single day, and they underestimate what they can achieve in 6 months of daily, focused commitment. That 1 hour, done every day, is not just 60 minutes. It is momentum. Momentum is not loud, it is subtle. It creeps in slowly, building confidence beneath the surface. You begin to notice that your mind shifts. You start thinking differently about yourself. You begin to see yourself as someone who follows through. And that quiet identity shift is far more valuable than any immediate result. When you think of people who have truly transformed their lives, it is rarely because they did something grand once, but because they did something small repeatedly, long enough for it to become part of who they are. The mind adapts to patterns. If your pattern is avoidance, your mind begins to associate challenge with retreat. If your pattern is disciplined repetition, your mind begins to associate effort with progress, even before the results are visible. This is why 1 committed hour a day becomes so powerful. It teaches your nervous system that progress is within your control. Most people feel powerless not because they lack ability, but because they lack structure. They float through their days reacting instead of building. But when you deliberately carve out an hour that is protected, intentional, and aligned with growth, you begin to take ownership of your time. Ownership over time leads to ownership over direction, and ownership over direction leads to ownership over destiny. The moment you choose to dedicate 1 hour a day to something meaningful, you stop living passively and start living architecturally. You begin to construct your life instead of drifting through it. But here's the crucial part. That 1 hour only matters when it is repeated regardless of mood. Discipline is forged in the moments where your feelings and your commitments collide. When you're excited, your hour feels easy. But the true hour, the hour that changes you, is the hour you give when you don't want to. Because that is when a psychological restructuring occurs. Your brain learns that discomfort does not signal retreat. It signals growth. If you always wait for motivation, you will always be controlled by emotional weather. Some days you'll feel like working, some days you won't. But building a life based on feelings is like trying to build a house on sand. Discipline is the concrete. It holds you steady when your emotions fluctuate, which they will, constantly. That's why people who rely on motivation rise fast and fall faster. People who rely on discipline rise slowly but stay standing. Think about it. What happens if you commit 1 hour a day to learning a new skill? At first, nothing noticeable. Maybe your progress feels embarrassingly small, but slowly, pattern recognition kicks in. You start connecting dots that you couldn't before. One day, something that felt complicated suddenly clicks. That moment of clarity is not random. It is earned through cycles of repetition. The brain rewards consistency with insight. Insight is the product of accumulated attention. Without repetition, attention scatters and learning dies, and yet people quit right before insight arrives because early repetition feels unrewarding. They don't realize they're quitting in the incubation phase, the critical period where the brain is quietly organizing information beneath the surface. If they stayed one more week, one more month, one more hour a day, the breakthrough would appear. But because they cannot tolerate delayed validation, they abandon the process prematurely. This is why 1 hour a day matters. It's enough to stay connected to your progress without overwhelming your schedule. It is manageable yet meaningful, and by making it a daily ritual, you train your identity to align with long-term growth rather than short-term relief. Human beings become what they repeatedly do. Repetition is not just a habit, it is a declaration of identity. When you show up for 1 hour a day, you are not just doing a task, you are becoming the kind of person who shows up. That shift in how you see yourself is far more transformative than the content of the hour itself, because once your identity aligns with discipline, discipline becomes automatic. And once discipline becomes automatic, results become inevitable. Now, let's move deeper into the idea of discipline over motivation. Most people misunderstand motivation. They treat it like fuel, as if it's the primary energy source for action. But motivation is more like a spark, useful to ignite the engine, but completely unreliable as a sustaining force. Discipline, on the other hand, is like a continuously flowing current. It doesn't care how you feel. It cares whether you act. Discipline is the refusal to negotiate with excuses. It is the recognition that your emotions are not always aligned with your goals. Sometimes your mind will try to protect you from effort by producing justifications. I don't have time today. I'll start when I feel better. One day off won't matter. These are not statements of truth. These are psychological defense mechanisms designed to avoid discomfort. The mind equates discomfort with danger, but in modern life, discomfort is not danger. Discomfort is the birthplace of transformation. The people who achieve mastery in any domain are not the ones who felt motivated every day. They are the ones who acted even when their motivation was absent. Discipline means you do not wait for emotional permission to take action. You understand that action itself generates motivation. This is something most people never realize. They believe they need motivation to start. But if you start first, the momentum generated by that action begins to produce motivation naturally. It is action that fuels motivation, not the other way around. Once you grasp this, everything changes. You stop waiting for the right moment and begin creating it. When you dedicate 1 hour a day consistently, you begin to see that discipline is not restrictive. It is liberating. People think discipline confines them, but in reality, it frees them. Without discipline, your life is dictated by impulse. Impulse is chaotic. It pulls you in multiple directions, leaving you scattered. With discipline, you gain control. You tell your mind where to go instead of letting it wander aimlessly. That 1 hour becomes a sanctuary of focus in a world of noise. In that hour, you train your ability to direct your attention. Attention is the most valuable currency in personal transformation. Whatever you give sustained attention to shapes you. If your attention is scattered across distractions, you become fragmented. If your attention is directed toward growth, you become aligned. This is why discipline is superior to motivation. Motivation is emotional. Discipline is structural. Motivation is reactive, discipline is intentional. When you live by motivation, your life feels inconsistent. When you live by discipline, your life begins to take a recognizable shape. 1 hour a day of disciplined focus begins to sculpt your mind. You begin to think differently, you develop patience, you develop resilience, you begin to see time differently. You're no longer looking for quick wins, you're playing a long-term game, and once your mindset shifts from immediacy to longevity, your stress begins to reduce. Because stress is often the result of misaligned expectations, people feel anxious when they expect immediate results from actions that require long-term commitment. But when you commit to 1 hour a day, every day, you no longer expect instant transformation. You simply focus on showing up, and ironically, that reduces anxiety and increases progress at the same time. Consistency breeds clarity. The more consistently you engage in something, the clearer your direction becomes. At first, you might not even know exactly where that 1 hour a day will lead you, but that's fine. You don't need certainty to begin. You need commitment. Certainty comes from movement. When you walk a path long enough, you begin to see where it leads. But if you stand still, waiting for the perfect path to reveal itself before taking a step, you remain paralyzed. Discipline is what gives you the courage to start without full clarity. It is better to move consistently in a direction that might need adjusting than to stay still waiting for perfect certainty. When you choose discipline over motivation, you begin to detach from the constant craving for emotional comfort. You begin to accept that discomfort is not a sign that you're doing something wrong. It's a sign that you're doing something meaningful. Comfort makes you feel safe. Challenge makes you feel alive. Most people choose safety over aliveness. But safety without growth turns into stagnation, and stagnation over time leads to regret. If you ask anyone looking back on their life what they regret most, it is rarely the hours they spent in disciplined effort. It is the hours they wasted in avoidance. Avoidance disguises itself as relaxation, but it doesn't restore you. Discipline, even though it requires effort, builds self-respect, and self-respect is far more energizing than comfort. When you hold yourself accountable to 1 hour a day, you begin to see that your life is not determined by grand gestures, but by manageable commitments. The mind can handle one focused hour. It struggles with overwhelming goals. That's why breaking transformation into small, daily disciplines works. It bypasses resistance. The mind says, I can handle 1 hour. And that is enough to bypass the psychological barrier that stops most people from beginning. Starting is the hardest part. That hour becomes your gateway to mastery. The important thing is not to negotiate that hour away. When the mind tries to bargain, you must remain firm. Just today is the phrase that destroys potential. Just today I'll skip. Just today I'll rest. Those tiny negotiations compound just like discipline does. 1 hour missed becomes 3, then a week, then suddenly the identity you were building collapses. So when you commit to 1 hour a day, guard it like something sacred, because it is. That hour contains your future. Every time you show up, you cast a vote for the person you are becoming. You are either voting for progress or voting for stagnation. There is no neutral action. Even rest is meaningful when it is earned, but avoidance disguised as rest erodes your self-trust. Discipline builds that self-trust back. And with self-trust, you become dangerous, not in a harmful way, but in a potent, capable, focused way. A person who trusts their ability to follow through is unstoppable. Their environment no longer dictates their effort. Their emotions no longer dictate their direction. They move from being reactive to being proactive. And life begins to respond differently to people who carry that kind of internal solidity. Imagine for a moment that you have an hour in front of you, a single, uninterrupted hour where the world isn't pulling at your attention, where no one is demanding anything of you, and where your mind is clear enough to focus. That hour, if used intentionally, has the power to alter the entire trajectory of your life. The problem is, most people never recognize it. They look for transformation in grand gestures, in sudden opportunities, in luck. or in some external force that will lift them into success. But that's not how growth works. Real growth is silent, invisible, and constructed through deliberate attention over time. 1 hour a day, fully engaged and consistently repeated, can do what years of wishful thinking will never accomplish. Because transformation is not about quantity of time, it's about quality of focus. It's astonishing how little it takes to make significant change if you truly pay attention. People spend years drifting, hoping something will click, yet they rarely give themselves the structure or the stillness to build depth in anything. When you dedicate an hour a day to something meaningful, something that challenges you, something that matters beyond the surface, you begin to anchor yourself in purpose. That hour becomes sacred. It becomes the foundation of order in your otherwise chaotic day. And the fascinating part is, once you begin to treat 1 hour with reverence, the rest of your time starts to reorganize itself around it. You start managing your distractions differently, choosing your priorities more carefully, and respecting your time as something finite rather than infinite. There's a principle in psychology called compounding attention. What you focus on repeatedly doesn't just grow in your external reality. It grows in your internal representation of who you are. Spend an hour a day learning a skill, and within a few weeks, your mind begins to identify as someone who is capable, improving, and progressing. That identity becomes fuel. You no longer see effort as a burden. You see it as a sign that you are moving towards something meaningful. The interesting thing about this process is that the results always start internally before they manifest externally. You feel different long before you look different. You think differently long before the world acknowledges that you've changed. But most people never experience that because they stop too soon. They demand visible proof before they commit to invisible effort. 1 hour a day is enough to build any skill if you are consistent. The math behind it is undeniable. An hour a day is 365 hours a year. That's over 9 full 40-hour work weeks. 9 weeks of focused, intentional learning in one specific direction. Think about that. Most people say they want to learn something new, but they scatter their time in fragments. 5 minutes here, 10 minutes there, constantly interrupted by distractions. That's not learning, that's dabbling. True mastery requires depth, and depth only comes when you sustain attention long enough to reach it. 1 focused hour can be worth 10 distracted ones, because learning is not about exposure, it's about absorption. The brain only retains what it truly attends to. If you were to spend 1 hour a day learning a language, within a year you could hold conversations fluently. 1 hour a day learning an instrument, and you'd be performing pieces most people only dream of playing. 1 hour a day reading, and you'd finish over 50 books in a year. 50 minds pouring their knowledge directly into yours. 1 hour a day working on your body, and you'd reshape not just your physique, but your confidence and your energy. The examples are endless, but the principle is universal. Sustained, deliberate focus over time creates exponential growth. But there's a catch. That hour must be protected from distraction like it's something sacred, because it is. Most people don't fail because they lack time. They fail because they allow interruptions to fracture their attention. Focus is a fragile state. It takes minutes to enter deeply, but only seconds to destroy. Every time you check your phone, glance at a notification, or let your mind wander to trivial concerns, you dilute the intensity of your concentration. The modern world has trained us to be perpetually distracted, to crave stimulation instead of silence, to consume instead of create. But that's precisely why 1 hour of true focus is so powerful. It's rare. It's rare because focus requires resistance. Focus is not something that happens by accident. It's a muscle that must be trained. When you commit to 1 hour a day, you are not just practicing a skill. You are practicing presence, and presence is the highest form of intelligence. It's the capacity to hold your attention in one place long enough to extract meaning from it. People think intelligence is measured by how fast you can process information, But that's not entirely true. Intelligence at its core is about depth of understanding, and depth only arises when you're still enough to think deeply. You must understand that focus is an act of rebellion in a distracted world. When you choose to shut everything else out and devote 1 hour to a single task, you are rejecting the pull of mediocrity. You are saying, I will not live reactively. You're reclaiming control over your consciousness. That's what makes focus transformative. It's not just about doing something productive. It's about reclaiming agency over your mind. And once you develop that kind of focus, it spills into every area of your life. You become more intentional in your relationships, your work, and your choices. You begin to live deliberately rather than habitually. The human mind is wired for growth, but it's also wired for conservation. It prefers the path of least resistance. That's why distraction feels easier than focus. Focus is effortful. It demands energy, self-regulation, and patience. But that's exactly why it produces results. The things that come easily rarely matter. The things that matter rarely come easily. The capacity to focus deeply for 1 hour a day is not just a productivity tool. It's a moral act. It's a statement about who you are and what you value, because where you direct your attention is a reflection of what you truly care about. When you begin to live like this 1 hour of deep, intentional work each day, you begin to notice a change in your perception of time. An hour doesn't feel small anymore, it feels profound. You start to see that most people are not lacking time, they're drowning in wasted fragments of it. The average person loses more than an hour a day to meaningless scrolling, to reactive thinking, to indecision. But imagine if you redirected that same energy into creation, learning, or refinement. The compound effect would be staggering. The gap between those who use their hour intentionally and those who waste it widens dramatically over time. It's the difference between someone who evolves and someone who stays stuck. Now, think about the nature of focus itself. When you concentrate deeply on something, your mind enters what psychologists call flow state. In flow, time disappears. You become fully absorbed in the task, and effort transforms into engagement. That state is not accidental. It's the product of structure. You can't stumble into flow if you're constantly switching context. The human brain needs at least 20 minutes of uninterrupted focus to even approach that level of immersion. But when you get there, your productivity multiplies. You begin to perform at your highest potential. You begin to experience the joy of mastery. That joy isn't shallow, it's deeply spiritual. It's the feeling of aligning with your own potential. And that's the real secret behind 1 hour a day. It's not about cramming more activity into your life. It's about creating a daily window for alignment. A time where you're not just existing but becoming. Every day, that 1 hour becomes a meeting with your higher self. You're telling yourself, I am worth this effort. And when you do that consistently, your self-respect grows. You start to believe that you are capable of building something meaningful because you see evidence of it every day. Let's go even deeper into the psychology of focus. Your attention is like a spotlight. It can only illuminate a limited area at once. Wherever you shine it, that part of your life grows. The tragedy is that most people let the spotlight move aimlessly. They allow external forces, media, noise, other people's opinions, to decide where their attention goes. The result is fragmentation. They work hard but in disconnected bursts, so their efforts never converge into progress. But if you can discipline your attention, if you can hold it steady in one direction for long enough, everything begins to coalesce. You start connecting ideas that others miss. You begin seeing patterns. You develop intuition. That's what mastery is, not knowing everything, but perceiving deeply within a specific domain. Focus also builds patience. When you're focused, you start understanding that real progress isn't immediate. It's cumulative. You learn to tolerate the boredom that comes before brilliance. That's something most people can't handle. They want excitement, not discipline, but boredom is a necessary stage of mastery. When you feel bored, it's not because the task has lost value, it's because your brain is reorganizing its patterns to reach the next level of understanding. If you quit every time boredom appears, you interrupt the very process that leads to growth. And this is where the combination of consistency and focus becomes so powerful. 1 hour a day of focused effort builds more than skill, it builds character. It shapes the kind of person who can delay gratification, who can persist through monotony, who can stay centered in a distracted world. That's what separates those who achieve greatness from those who only dream about it. Greatness is not given to the most talented. It's earned by those who can endure repetition without losing enthusiasm. You might think, but 1 hour isn't enough. And that's where you're mistaken. 1 hour done with full concentration compounds over time in ways that are exponential. It's like sharpening a blade a little every day. At first, it doesn't seem to matter. But eventually, that blade can cut through anything. Focused attention over time accumulates not just knowledge but depth, precision, and power. The mind becomes sharper, the skill becomes second nature, and the individual becomes someone others admire for their clarity and capability. In that 1 hour, you're not merely practicing a task, you're building a fortress of mental order against chaos. Because life, by its nature, tends toward disorder, entropy affects everything. Your mind, your habits, your environment, all drift toward chaos unless consciously maintained. That hour of focus is your daily resistance against that drift. It's how you bring order to your life, and order is what allows you to build something lasting. This is the paradox most people never understand. The freer you want to be, the more structure you must create. Freedom without focus becomes aimlessness, but focus creates the kind of discipline that leads to freedom. The freedom to direct your life, to master your craft, to live with purpose. That's what 1 hour a day gives you. It's a tool for reclaiming your life from randomness. And as you continue this process, something else happens. You begin to notice the subtle, almost invisible progress accumulating. What was once difficult becomes easier. Tasks that felt impossible become natural. You start anticipating problems before they appear. You begin to think several steps ahead. That's the mark of transformation. It doesn't happen overnight. It happens through daily exposure to focused effort. The beauty of 1 focused hour a day is that it doesn't demand perfection. It demands consistency. You don't have to be brilliant every day. You just have to be there. You just have to show up, shut out the noise, and give that hour everything you have. And if you do that long enough, your results will start to look like genius, even though they're simply the product of discipline and focus repeated over time. And eventually, something remarkable begins to occur. That 1 hour starts influencing the other 23. You become more intentional in how you use the rest of your day. You start to notice that the quality of your attention affects the quality of your life. You begin to see distractions for what they are, thieves of potential. And the more you experience the fulfillment that comes from deep focus, the less appealing those distractions become. Your relationship with time changes, and so does your relationship with yourself. Focus, then, becomes not just a practice but a philosophy, a way of living. 1 hour a day is not just about skill acquisition. It's about training your mind to engage deeply with the world, to pursue excellence instead of mediocrity, and to find meaning in effort rather than escape in comfort. Imagine waking up one day and realizing that the person you have become is not someone you consciously chose, but someone who was shaped by years of small, automatic decisions. That's how identity forms, not by dramatic declarations or sudden transformations, but through incremental choices repeated over time. Every action you take, every hour you invest, is like voting for the type of person you are becoming. Most people don't understand this. They believe identity is fixed, as if they are merely passengers in their own lives. But identity is constructed. It's sculpted through repetition. If you spend your days in distraction, your identity becomes scattered. If you spend your days avoiding responsibility, you begin to believe you are incapable of handling life's challenges. But if you carve out 1 hour a day to move with purpose, to engage with something that contributes to your potential, your identity begins to shift. Your future self is built in the quiet, repetitive moments, not in bursts of inspiration. It's shaped in those minutes where no one is watching, where there is no applause, no immediate reward, only effort. And that effort, when sustained, begins to restructure your self-perception. You start to see yourself not as someone who merely wants change, but as someone who creates change. There's a profound psychological distinction between wanting and becoming. Wanting is passive, becoming is active, and becoming demands consistent action. When you dedicate an hour each day to your growth, you're no longer hoping for transformation. You're engineering it. Most people live reactively. They respond to circumstances instead of designing them. But when you commit to daily growth, your mindset shifts from passive recipient to active architect. You start to understand that your future is not something you wait for, it's something you assemble. Each day becomes a construction site. The materials are your habits, your focus, your discipline, your decisions. And 1 hour of purposeful action each day is enough to move the project forward. It might not seem like much, but small building blocks placed consistently create monumental structures. You might wonder, how can something so small, just an hour a day, create such a significant identity shift? The answer lies in psychological reinforcement. Every time you show up, even when you don't feel like it, you send a message to your subconscious. I am the kind of person who follows through. Most people live with a fractured sense of self because their actions contradict their intentions. They say, I want to be disciplined, yet they avoid discipline. They say, I want to grow, yet they cling to comfort. This internal conflict creates self-doubt. But when your actions align with your intentions, even in small ways, your identity begins to stabilize. You begin to trust yourself. Self-trust is not built by making promises, it's built by keeping them, and 1 hour a day is a promise you make to your future self. When you follow through, you begin to walk with a different posture. You carry yourself differently. There's a quiet confidence that develops, not arrogance, but assurance. You know that even if life throws chaos your way, you have built a habit of order. You have built the discipline to push forward. That identity becomes your anchor. Now consider this. The difference between stagnation and growth is often not dramatic. It's subtle. It's found in the hours we dismiss as insignificant. You don't wake up one morning suddenly stagnant. Stagnation creeps in through small daily compromises. I'll do it tomorrow. I don't feel like it today. One day off won't matter. These thoughts seem harmless, but over time they accumulate like layers of dust on potential. And then, one day, you look around and realize you've become stuck. Not because you lacked ability, but because you drifted away from intentional action. Growth works the same way, but in the opposite direction. It doesn't burst into your life with fanfare. It sneaks in quietly, disguised as consistent effort. It begins with small actions. An hour of learning, an hour of training, an hour of building something. And at first, it seems as though nothing is happening, but beneath the surface, momentum is forming. Like a seed buried in soil, progress is invisible before it becomes undeniable. The tragedy is that most people never reach the undeniable phase because they quit during the invisible phase. They expect rapid results, and when results don't arrive quickly, they assume the effort is wasted. But effort is never wasted. Even when the results are not visible, effort is building internal strength, discipline, patience, resilience. Those who stay in the game long enough always reach a point where their effort begins to compound. That's when growth accelerates. That's when others look at them and say, "How did you change so much?" They see the visible transformation, but they don't see the invisible hours that produced it. The difference between someone who grows and someone who stagnates is not intelligence, luck, or opportunity. It's simply consistency. Consistency is the great separator. It divides those who merely wish from those who actually build. Wishing requires nothing. Building requires repetition. Repetition rewires your brain. It carves pathways of habit that eventually become your default state. And when growth becomes your default state, stagnation no longer feels comfortable. You literally outgrow your old identity. When you operate like this 1 hour a day of intentional effort, you begin to see time differently. You stop wasting your life waiting for a breakthrough, and you start building one manually. You begin to understand that breakthrough is not a single moment. It is the result of accumulated effort reaching a tipping point. And those tipping points are only reached by those who refuse to quit. Consistency is not glamorous. It is often dull, repetitive, uneventful, but it's sacred because within that repetition lies transformation. Think of it like this. Every day you have a choice to feed one of two identities, the identity of growth or the identity of stagnation. If you choose comfort, avoidance, and distraction, you feed stagnation. If you choose effort, focus, and discipline, you feed growth. Whichever one you feed becomes stronger. Identity is not found, it is fed. And every hour you invest is like nourishment for the identity you wish to build. There's also another truth worth acknowledging. Consistency is not just about progress, it's about separation. Consistency creates a gap. While others hesitate, you are moving. While others are distracted, you are focused. While others question their ability, you are building it. Over time, that gap becomes significant. It becomes so wide that people begin to describe your progress as luck or talent simply because they don't understand how you got there. They don't see the compounding effect of consistent, focused action because they never allowed themselves to experience it. One of the most powerful realizations a person can have is that excellence is not achieved through dramatic bursts of effort, but through daily alignment with purpose. When you show up every day, you create a rhythm. That rhythm becomes a lifestyle, and lifestyle is what determines destiny. People don't fail because they lack potential. They fail because their lifestyle is not aligned with their potential. This is why 1 hour a day is so transformative. It's not overwhelming, it's sustainable, it's structured enough to build momentum but flexible enough to fit into a busy life. It removes the excuse of "I don't have time." Everyone has an hour, but only a few decide to use it consciously. And that decision to use your hour intentionally begins to separate your path from the average. When you live like this, a shift happens in your mind. You stop asking, "How fast can I get there?" And you start asking, "How far can I go if I don't stop?" That single shift in perspective changes everything, because speed is irrelevant without direction, but direction combined with consistency creates unstoppable movement. That's the psychology of long-term growth. It's not about intensity, it's about endurance. Over time, your hour becomes more than just a habit. It becomes sacred ground, a space where you meet the best version of yourself, a daily appointment with your future. A place where you step out of the noise of the world and engage with something higher, something disciplined, something aligned. And once you've experienced the quiet satisfaction of daily, intentional effort, the chaos of distraction loses its appeal. Comfort becomes less interesting than progress. Entertainment becomes less fulfilling than growth. And here's something most people don't realize. The more disciplined you are with 1 hour, the more freedom you earn in the rest of your day. Because discipline is not the opposite of freedom. Discipline is what makes freedom meaningful. Without discipline, freedom becomes aimlessness. But with discipline, freedom becomes purposeful. You're no longer floating, you're navigating. You have direction, you have structure, you have identity, and identity built on discipline is unshakable.